It won't be a restful offseason for Buffalo Bills general manager Brandon Beane, so we're examining his offseason checklist today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Friday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. And as a reminder to you, we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, folks, we completed the performance review series, and through that, we had a good, honest conversation about every player on the roster through the lens of each specific position group. And so, with us having a strong understanding of how the players performed and projecting them to 2023, it's now time to consider exactly what Brandon Beane has to get done this offseason. Identifying the needs. And so what I want to do today is look at this position by position, talk about exactly what he needs to get done this offseason, and then some ideas about how he can attack that. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the what today than the how, but it should really help us moving forward as we do start to preview the free agents on offense and defense and really talk about the outside additions that this team can make to the roster. So in some ways, this will really bring all of our discussions over the last couple weeks together to allow us to move forward here. So let's dig into it. We'll do 3 segments. The first one will hit the offensive skill positions. Then we'll get into the trenches in segment 2, and then segment 3, back 7 on defense and specialists. So at quarterback, the Bills have an expiring contract in Case Keenum, Josh Allen's backup quarterback. And so what Brandon Beane has to get done here is figure out who the backup quarterback's going to be. Now, he's already secured Matt Barkley to a futures contract. And he's a wonderful player to have on the scout team, on your practice squad. But you can't live in a world where you're one snap away from Matt Barkley being the quarterback for your football team. And so whether it's a veteran, in which I think there are plenty of intriguing veterans that the Bills could consider to be a backup, or it's bringing back Case Keenum, Brandon Beane has to figure out who Josh Allen's backup quarterback is going to be. Now, you've had a really useful season with Case Keenum. Not that you saw him play a ton, but you should have a feel for who he is and if you want him back on that role. Now, obviously, the Bills can't commit a ton here of money, and so I think that kind of takes them out of the big name backups. But if Mitch Trubisky gets released from Pittsburgh, would he be interested in coming back to be a backup again? There's going to be some interesting options. And having a backup quarterback is important. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this past season in the NFL featured the most different starting quarterbacks. I think it pushed like 70 different players started a game this season. Tons of teams played 3 quarterbacks. I mean, in the Bills division alone, the Jets and Dolphins started 3 different quarterbacks this season. The Patriots, 2 different starting quarterbacks. The Bills are very fortunate to get through the season without having to not have Josh Allen for a game. And so Brandon Beane's got to figure out backup quarterback. Let's move on to running back. The expired contracts are Devin Singletary and Taiwan Jones. So your starter in Singletary and your key special teams ace in Taiwan Jones. And of course, Nyheim Hines, whose contract has to be redone. There's not a scenario where Nyheim Hines is back on the same deal that he's signed for. There's too much opportunity to move money around, and you're not going to sign up for that. And so what does Brandon Beane need to get done here at running back? They need a complement to James Cook. And I think they need a stylistically different player than James Cook, somebody that can really run between the tackles, be a physical downhill back, that can handle short yardage, that gives you something in pass protection. And I don't think that's a hard thing to find. That's what's exciting about this is it's not like you're looking for a very challenging skill set. These skill sets are always available. Go find your Isaiah Pacheco in the, 7th round. The Chiefs got this guy. Looks like an awesome player. Go find your that. And so mid to late round pick, get yourself a downhill running back that can protect, win in short yardage, and provide a different skill set to James Cook. That's what you got to get done at running back. At tight end, your expired contract here is Tommy Sweeney. And so what I think Brandon Beane has to do with the tight end position is really look at ways to challenge the depth. This is a really, really, really good tight end class in the draft. I mean, really good. Premier talent in depth. And I think the Bills should participate in this. I think they should draft a tight end at some point. I don't think you want to be one snap away from Quentin Morris being your starter. And that's the world they lived in last year. Love Dawson Knox, but I certainly want to make sure there's better depth here. And so I think a mid-round draft pick on a player that can replace Tommy Sweeney but also challenge Q Morris is something that I think Brandon Beane has to get done at the tight end position. So not a huge task here, but a mid-round pick on a intriguing player that can block a little bit and maybe provide some special teams value, but you also feel good about them being groomed as a tight end too. That's what Brandon Beane has to get done at tight end. At wide receiver, this is where there's some stuff to sort out. Your expired contracts here are Cole Beasley, Jamison Crowder, and Jake Kumaro. It's also worth mentioning that you can move on from Isaiah McKenzie and free up some, I think, north of $2 million in cap space. What I think the Bills need to figure out here is a couple of things. First, Brandon Beane's got to find a legit answer in the slot. And I think that could be Khalil Shakir. And I'd love to pair him with Cole Beasley for another season and get those guys going in the slot. I think Khalil Shakir can really be a featured part of this offense starting next year and then really into 2024. And so I would certainly not want to go in with all your eggs in the basket of Khalil Shakir being your answer in the slot. And that's why I'd like to bring Cole Beasley back to kind of platoon that role. But I think there should be a really nice path here for Khalil Shakir to really eat into some targets here for this offense. But you also got to find, in my opinion, a wide receiver too in the waiting with an early pick. I think the Bills need to draft a receiver in the first 3 rounds. Because regardless of what you think of Gabriel Davis, and we know that I'm pretty lukewarm on him at best as a 90 to 100 target piece of this offense, he's entering a contract year. And let's say he has a very similar season to the one he just had. I mean, you're talking about north of $15 million a season for that. And what you're paying Knox and Diggs, I don't know that you're going to want to have $40 million a season tied up to your top 2 receivers and your tight end. And so finding that young player that you think can step into a prominent role in 2024 and maybe even challenge Gabe this year is something that the Bills should really be thinking about. And I like some of these options in the draft. In the first round, if the Bills had a chance to draft Jackson Smith and Jigba from Ohio State, I think he is a really exciting slot option that I think can play some on the outside too. He's not a burner, but route running, separation, hands, feel for getting open, I like him. And then Jordan Addison, who he's more of a do-everything guy. He's not a guy that's going to win with physicality, but separation, yards after catch, vertical receiving skills, can play inside, outside. I like that a lot. I'd like that a lot at 27. You get into day 2, there's players I like there. Josh Downs from North Carolina, Tyler Scott from Cincinnati. There's going to be players in the first 3 rounds that I think the Bills need to invest in to give yourself a guy that you're I don't want to say stashing for a season, because I think if you pick this player in the first 3 rounds, they should help you this year, but that's groomed to be your number 2 moving forward after this season, regardless of what happens with Gabe Davis. I don't know that you can pay him. I just don't think that's good resource allocation to have that much tied into 2 receivers and the tight end. What I think Brandon Beane also has to be mindful of here, and I feel pretty good about him not falling into this, is I don't think he needs to overpay for a free agent. I'm not really interested in the Alan Lazards, the Jacoby Myers, the who else? Mecole Hardman. Those players don't move the needle for me. Not for what you have to pay him. DJ Chark at $10 million. That's going to be a pass for me. And so there's just not the veteran out there that's available in free agency that screams go get him to me. Now, I think you can put yourself in a position to be attractive to players that could come available. Think about the market that didn't exist for Juju Smith-Schuster last year, and him realizing that he was going to maximize the 2022 season by being on the Chiefs offense and playing with Patrick Mahomes. I think you can reasonably think that could happen for the Bills. Whether, look at some of these receivers, the market may not be there the way that they want to, and they resolve to going to Buffalo to play with Josh Allen, and that being their best opportunity to maximize themselves in future years. And so I think there's a bargain bin of receivers that could make sense. But regardless, even if they were to sign Odell Beckham Jr. or something like that, I still think they need to draft a young player in the first 3 rounds. And if you do get a player like that, maybe you lean more into the slot possibilities and you wait. Maybe that's you like Trey Tucker from Cincinnati in the 3rd round, or Marvin Mims from Oklahoma in the 3rd round, as opposed to some of the 1st and 2nd round targets. So there's a lot of different ways to get this done, but I think you need to, at a minimum, solidify your slot position so that way you have more trustworthy targets in the short to intermediate areas of the field that can win with route running and keep the offense on schedule, get some more efficiency going here. And maybe you want Gabe Davis back as your 2, but I think you need a hedge there for future years. So this is a big position for Brandon Beane to sort out, is wide receiver. And it's a free agency / draft angle that you have to go here to get this right. And in some ways, I think you want to get younger and cheaper at this position. And you need guys that can play special teams as well. And that's something that was really missing from this group last year with Jake Kumro and his injury. So wide receiver, big priority for Brandon Beane on the offseason checklist. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's get to the trenches here in this segment. O-line, D-line, and what Brandon Beane needs to get done this offseason as we create the to-do list for the Bills general manager. At offensive line, you've got a bunch of expiring contracts here. Roger Saffold, and then all your backups, basically. Bobby Hart, Greg Van Roten, Ike Butker, David Quessenberry. So you need to get 2 things done here. Most important is get a starter at guard. You need an upgrade to Roger Saffold at guard. And maybe part of this is moving Ryan Bates back to left guard, where he seemed to perform a bit better than on the right side. And we've heard Ryan Bates talk about him having more comfort at left guard than right guard. But you still need a starting guard. And there's some free agents. I'll admit that. There's some intriguing free agents. Now, you don't want to overpay. You don't want to do what the Jets did last year with Lincoln Tomlinson and overpay. That you got to fight against that. But if you think you can pull it off, if you feel like committing money to a Dalton Risner makes sense, then do it. Figure it out. But you need an upgrade here. And it shouldn't be hard. I thought Roger Saffold had a bad season. And so whether it's an early pick, thinking about Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin, John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota, Cody Mauch from North Dakota State, looking at one of those players, which would be nice to have an answer in the form of a rookie contract. That'd be good. Like that a lot. Or it's a free agent. You got to get better at guard. There's no question about it. And then you really have to figure out the depth. Like we mentioned, Hart, Van Roten, Bucker, Quessenberry, all your depth. They are expired contracts. Now, you can get some of these guys back on low-cost deals. But you got to figure out who you want and if there are chances to give better players low-cost deals to elevate your depth. The X factor here is Tommy Doyle. Very interested to see what he's in line for this year. At a minimum, you hope he provides you with a 4-hole backup like David Quessenberry gave you, both guard spots and both tackle spots. But I'm not ruling out him being in the mix to be a starting guard for this team. And that'd be nice. That'd be really nice if that wound up happening and it works out, right? It's one thing for it to happen, but, can he play? I'd be interested in that. I think that's when you consider how to get some production out of your draft picks, contributors on rookie deals, guys with physical upside. I certainly think about that. And so to tie a ribbon on this offensive line discussion, you need an upgrade at starting guard. You got to sort out the depth and be honest about what Tommy Doyle can do for your football team. Because if that can be a steal at guard, that'd be exciting. That'd be like, remember Brad Butler? Where I'll never forget the press conference. Marv Levy was the GM, and he was asked about, fixing the offensive line and that type of stuff. And he said, sometimes it's about players that are on your team taking on bigger roles and elevating. And he mentioned Brad Butler. And Brad Butler wound up being a good starter for a few years. So can Tommy Doyle be your next Brad Butler? That'd be nice, right? So obviously offensive line have a chance to upgrade here, and it should be a high priority. I mean, wide receiver, guard, those are two huge priorities for the offense. Let's move to the defensive side of the football and talk about defensive ends. The only expiring contract right now at defensive end is Shaq Lawson. Technically, you don't have to do anything here. You have Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, and then even Kingsley Jonathan, who was on the practice squad. Actually, he got signed to the Bears active roster, and then the Bills were able to get him back later in the season and then played a little bit later on in the year and had some flashes, I guess. Is he in the mix to be your defensive end 5? So technically you don't have to do anything here. I would definitely be wanting to invest a draft pick at some point. Maybe not overly high, but 3rd, 4th round, something like that. And maybe you move back from 27 to kind of gain some extra picks, depending on who's available at 27. I think there's players you wouldn't trade away from. But with the Bills only having 6 draft picks in this coming draft, might want to look at a chance to move back and get yourself more darts to throw at the board to get some hits. And drafting a defensive end at some point, I think, is a good idea because obviously Shaq Lawson's an expiring contract, but AJ Epinesa is in a contract year, and I don't think you're getting in a position where you think about wanting to pay him a second contract. Let's say he goes out and has 6 sacks again this year. Someone's going to pay him. Someone's going to pay him like $6, $7, $8 million a year, and it shouldn't be the Bills. So I think you want to have a player that you're developing that can provide additional depth, right? Because not all four of those guys, Miller, Rousseau, Basham, Epinesa, not all four are going to play every single game next year. And you played 5 pretty regularly this past season. So get yourself a tools a young player at the position. At defensive tackle, your expiring contract here is Jordan Phillips. But what's interesting about that is the other 3 players, Ed Oliver, Tim Settle, and Daquan Jones, they're all entering the final year of their deal. And so to me, this is an area of concern. And Jordan Phillips, just over the last 3 years of his career, he's been hurt a ton. He's been hurt a lot, missed significant time each of the last 3 seasons, and probably should have missed a bit more time this year. He tried to play with a hamstring injury and then, of course, with a shoulder injury. And so I don't know that you bring, if he wants the same 1 year, $5 million that he got this year, I would not pay him that. I would pay him maybe half of that. But that puts you in a position, regardless of what happens with Jordan Phillips, that you need to have some youth here, because everyone's contract here is up after next season. And so I'd be thinking about a day 2 pick on a defensive tackle. Mentioned the name Keanu Benton from Wisconsin yesterday on the podcast. Kalijah Cansey from Pittsburgh. There's some guys that day 2 range that would make some sense here for the Bills to consider and tool up on some young players. Get you a little bit cheaper and give yourself some developmental upside here behind a bunch of players that you feel like you know what they are. And by having some guys waiting in the wings, this is going to put you in a position where you can let players move on that don't warrant extensions and feel good about it, because that's the reality of this roster and the talent that it has and how expensive it has become. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. It's Ultimate Football GM. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory by trying to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft with all the ups and downs of a season. All this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, on the go, as you want and when you want to. Check this out. We've created a Locked On League for you to compete against Locked On fans all over the world. Just choose the Locked On League in the app to join and see if you can create football dynasty. In fact, Locked On Bills listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On, so make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. All right, let's get to the back 7 on defense. Linebackers, corners, safeties, and then quick conversation on specialists as we fill out Brandon Beane's to-do list here on the podcast today. At linebacker, we all know the deal here. Expiring contract, Tremaine Edmunds. He's not the only one. A.J. Klein, Tyler Medikevich. Those are your 3 expiring contracts at linebacker. You got to figure out what you're going to do with Tremaine. And predictively, I've said I think they extend him. But you got to get that deal done. Obviously, Tremaine's camp is going to have an idea of what that deal should look like. The Bills are going to have an idea of what that deal should look like. You see where you land. But I got a feeling it gets done. If it doesn't get done, well, you need a starting Mike linebacker. And I have a hard time believing that Terrell Bernard's going to be that guy. I really do. And so, what are you going to do here? Are you going to, if you let Tremaine go, are you going to go sign Alex Anzalone in free agency? Maybe. But it gets challenging. It gets challenging. I kind of like the idea of Tremaine back as opposed to exploring the other options out there or trusting a rookie to come in and replace the leader of your defense. There's linebackers that I like, none in the first round. There'd be some day 2 players, but I can't sit here and say that you need a day 2 pick at this position for every position, right? That's not a reality that you can live in. You can't pick a wide receiver, a linebacker, a safety, a guard, all of that. You only have so many day 2 picks. You can't get depth at defensive tackle and defensive end that could eventually be meaningful rotational players. You can't do it all. So some of this has to be resolved by extensions and veteran free agents. But with a player like Tremaine, I think he's going to be back. Your other free agents are A.J. Klein and Tyler Medikevich, who are important special teams players. And so on one hand, do you feel like what you have in Balin Spector and Terrell Bernard is good enough? You bring back Dotson on a low-cost deal, and you feel like you're okay here. But you're going to want to sort out this depth, or Brandon Beane's going to need to sort out this depth to make sure that he's getting what he wants from a reserve perspective, but also special teams perspective. So some things he'll have to ask himself at depth, but also resolving the Tremaine Edmunds contract extension. At cornerback, this is an interesting position because I think you can make the case that the Bills don't have to do anything. And to me, that's really contingent on the direction of Christian Benford. If you're going to keep Christian Benford at corner, you're good. You're good. I think you let Dane Jackson become an unrestricted free agent, see if you can bring him back on a low-cost deal. But otherwise, Benford as your backup to Elam and White on the outside with Taron Johnson and Saron Neal as your slot players, that's fine. That's fine. I don't think you have to panic there. Now, if you were going to move Christian Benford to safety and you can't bring back Dane Jackson, now all of a sudden you need some depth at outside corner. But the Bills at corner have very quickly went from an area of concern to, they're in pretty good shape here. At safety, well, I should go back. Cornerback, the only technical expired contract is Dane Jackson, who's actually a restricted free agent. That's it at corner. At safety, your expired contracts here, you've got 4 of them. Jordan Poyer, Dean Marlowe, Jaquan Johnson, Cam Lewis, who's a restricted free agent. So you got to figure out what you're going to do at safety if you're Brandon Beane. I don't know that they're going to be able to be super competitive in the Jordan Poyer sweepstakes if there is a sweepstakes. It's a good free agent crop of safeties. There's good players in the draft. Jordan Poyer's 32, had a host of injuries last year. I have a hard time being fully convinced that there's going to be a number of teams lining up to give him everything he wants in a contract. And so that, to me, it opens the door a little bit for the possibility of him being back. I think it's unlikely, but I think it makes me somewhat willing to believe that it could happen. But Brandon Beane's going to have to sort out and figure out what he wants to do there. Is it Christian Benford? Is it drafting a safety? Is it a lower cost veteran to bring in like a Von Bell or DeMonte Casey or Donovan Wilson? There's options out there. Deshaun Elliott. Pay them a third of what it would take to bring back Poyer. But you got to figure out your starter opposite of Micah Hyde. And then you've got a ton of questions to answer about depth. Again, what Christian Benford winds up doing here dictates a lot at corner and safety. But between Dean Marlowe, Cam Lewis, Jaquan Johnson, that's a veteran in Marlowe that knows your scheme, that's played a fair amount of football over the years for you, and then 2 of your most impactful special teamers in Jaquan Johnson and Cam Lewis. So sorting out the depth here and figuring out your starter opposite of Micah Hyde is high priorities for Brandon Beane. Real quick, special teams, Sam Martin, the Bills punter, expired. I've said it 1,000 times. I'll say it one more time. Sam Martin was the best Bills punter since Brian Mormon back in 2011. Would love for him to be back as the Bills punter again. Didn't have one holding concern. Was a very consistent punter. I enjoyed the stability of him being back there and the trust that I had in him being back there. But you either got to bring back Sam Martin or you got to find a new punter. And that's something for Brandon Beane to sort out. So at almost every position, there's something kind of important, whether it's key depth pieces, starters, a lot for Brandon Beane to figure out this offseason. And so think we've done a good inventory of what the Bills have, what they need, and now we can start to focus on the how. And so next week, we're going to talk salary cap. We're going to talk about players that can improve from within the roster and provide more significant contributions than they have this year. Where are those opportunities? Who on the roster that you already have can make a bigger impact and take some of the burden off of what you need to do in the offseason. So we'll definitely look at things through that lens next week. Herd mentality. It'll be fun. We'll talk Bills football. I hope to get into the coaching staff. Hopefully that's finalized pretty soon. I know that Adam Henry was hired as the wide receivers coach. There's an assistant O-line coach that we'll talk about once that's formally announced. Chad Hall, right? And then I also want to evaluate Ken Dorsey and Leslie Frazier and Matthew Smiley and Sean McDermott. So there should be a coaching staff discussion next week as well. So we got a lot to get to. Hopefully you won't miss anything. You'll make sure that you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great weekend. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again on Monday.